Like most of the cast, Faust has had his defense value modifier decreased, so he takes less damage. In the old patch, this sequence did 103 to him. This is how much he takes in the current patch. 98, so a difference of about 5 damage, which is pretty on par for what we usually see for changes like this. Generally with these videos, I tend to try and read the patch changes within order that they're presented on the patch notes themselves. However, for Faust, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because he has completely new mechanics regarding his items to work with. So I'd rather go ahead and start off with the more simpler comparisons that we can draw between the two versions before we get into exploring what he can now do with his items. First off, let's take a look at his jumping 2K, which now has increased land and recovery. For this one, I'm just going to put the two of them side by side so that we can see how much longer it takes for Faust to recover in general. It seems to be the difference of a couple of frames, so I'm not entirely sure just how meaningful of a change this is. Generally, a good Faust player is going to space this correctly, make you block it, and then cancel into any of his follow-up moves, like mix, 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 or tossing a bomb at you. So they have ways of getting around this one. It's not like he could combo off of this before, and in the previous patch, he was able to be close/punished if he let the entire move rock without canceling it. So it feels like this is a nerf more targeted at punishing a Faust for missing this move and making it more likely that he can be whiff punished for it. So overall, it's a nerf that I don't think affects the character too much, but I think it's a good change overall, punishing bad play while incentivizing better play when it comes to spacing out this move. Faust Air Throw has seen a buff. In the previous patch, it threw the opponent pretty far away with a little bit of knockdown time. It was possible to run him again immediately on this one, but nothing really too crazy or extravagant. This is how Air Throw looks in the current patch. As you can see, the opponent is much closer to Faust and has a higher ground bounce, so there's more frame advantage. You should be able to reliably get a close/meaty on run-up, or be able to toss out a couple extra items that you couldn't do so before. Overall, it's a small niche buff to Faust, but one that he appreciates. Before, if you stored an item from What Could This Be by holding down punch and then inputted 2-2 punch in order to launch the item, you had no influence over the direction in which it launched. As you can see, pretty much all the trumpets that I properly threw were landed in the exact same place. This was pretty detrimental for Faust at sometimes, because if you pulled a beneficial item like trumpet, you were basically forced to then throw it out for the opponent to also have an opportunity to scramble forward and claim the item for themselves. This wasn't too bad for more aggressive items, but certainly was a problem for when it came to Faust wanting to consistently utilize trumpet. Now, if you hold forward or back while you throw an item from the 2-2 punch input of What Could This Be after you stored an item, you're able to control the trajectory of the item and where it's thrown. As you can see, I can dramatically control where the trumpet falls after Faust spits it out with 2-2 punch. This is pretty great for Faust that gives him a little bit more control over the items that he's able to summon. For aggressive items, he's able to choose where he wants to set them up, so he's able to use them like for defensive purposes to deny the enemy's approach, or offensive purposes, throwing them at full screen. And if he ever gets an item like trumpet, he's able to consistently make sure that it's weighted in his favor for him to go and scramble for. It does remove some of the chaotic elements of Faust, but I also am a fan of giving the Faust player more control and having decisions to make in these situations, as opposed to just, I stored the item, now I split out the item. It's worth noting that there is one exception to this property, and that's going to be with the meteor items. The meteors will pretty much always fall in the same spot that they did. The damage from hole-in-one, the follow-up to thrust and then pull back, has increased damage on its clean hit. Before, it did 60 damage on a full health Asako with the clean hit. This is the new damage. 75, so an increase of 15. A nice little buff for Faust. There's now a new property with hole-in-one as well. It's its own special move that can be performed with quarter circle back heavy slash. There's a lot of implications to this. There's no clean hit property, but it does have some new interactions with Faust's kit. Before we get into that, I want to go over a couple of more changes that we can compare between the two patches before we jump into all of Faust's new mechanics. Bomb has increased damage. In the old patch, it did 52 damage. This is the new damage. 60 damage now, so an increase of 8 damage. 100-ton weight also has increased damage. Before, it would do 18 damage. And this is the new damage. 37, so the damage has been more than doubled actually. It's still not a whole lot of damage, but I suppose it's a nice little buff there, especially considering the fact that Faust is going to have a little bit more control with where... Banana actually has a pretty important change to it overall. In the previous patch, if the opponent slipped on the banana peel, they were not put into any sort of knockdown state and would tech upon making contact with the ground. So effectively, this would mean that they would be tripped up a bit, and Faust could have an opportunity to at least close the gap between them, or start setting up a bit of offense, but nothing too crazy. Now, upon making contact with the enemy, the banana peel actually causes a hard knockdown. This is pretty potent because now all of a sudden Faust gets some more guaranteed time to potentially pull out more items or close the gap to run offense, or even combo into this with moves that didn't give a hard knockdown and then use this in place of a hard knockdown. There's a lot of creative things to play around with that I'm excited to see what Faust players are able to cook up with. However, it's also worth pointing out that this hard knockdown property also applies to Faust. So this could definitely be something that turns out to be a bit of a hindrance for Faust in some situations. Afro now does more damage when it explodes. Previously, it did 30 damage. In the current patch, it now does 45, so an increase of 15. The last change to Faust items comes to Mini Faust, and this one is actually a nerf, unlike all the other items that have received buffs so far. They made it so that Mini Faust will now turn around less times than he did before. Let's take a look at this behavior real quick in the old patch. As you can see, Mini Faust followed Asuka for about 3 different turns, so he turned around twice on us. After that point, he ran off to the other edge of the screen until he expired, which we could hear by the audio cue. This is how Mini Faust behaves in the current patch. Danger. As you can see, instead of turning around a second time to continuing to follow Asuka, Mini Faust only turns around to follow the opponent once. So if you're able to evade him these 2 times, then Mini Faust should leave you alone if you're able to stay away from that part of the screen. This is a pretty dramatic nerf to the item overall, because it means that Faust is going to have less control over neutral when Mini Faust is on screen. Doesn't change any of the other effectiveness for Mini Faust, but should prove to be a little less frustrating for the opponent, now having a bit of easier counterplay because you have less time where you have to deal with both Faust and Mini Faust. Now it's time to get into the core of this patch for Faust, which basically revolves around an entirely new mechanic for him where he's able to have more interaction with his items. His dust attack is now able to strike his items on the way down, and he's able to use his new special move, Hole in One, to also interact with these items. It's more than just the hammer that I demonstrated here. It's pretty much any single item that Faust is able to spawn. I will note that in my experience, using Dust Attack to hit items is way more difficult than it is to use Hole in One, which has a massive hitbox that is very much designed to be this big to make it simple to hit all these items. And this affects pretty much every item. You could do this with Trumpet, for example, though why would you unless you're just trying to say, go ahead, you need some assistance in order to beat me. As you can see, it will even affect a down item. I can't make Charge Dust do that, for example. This also affects meteors. In the right spacing, you can hit multiple of them. And when you interact with items like this, you're able to give them some differences in their properties. Let's go ahead and go through a couple notable ones. Let's start with 100 ton. Currently in the patch, the item does 37 damage if it hits the opponent after Faust tosses it. However, if he hits this with his dust or his hole-in-one special move, he's able to do more damage with the ton now. As you can see, whiffing normals is probably useful as a timing tool to make sure that you're able to hit the item at ideal arcs where it's actually going to make contact with the opponent. When we see here as well, when it's hit by hole-in-one or his dust, it does 60 damage against the opponent now. We also probably see the resulting reasons for why they expanded the Earthquake's horizontal hitbox. Considering the fact that now Faust can hit this 100 ton off-screen, they wanted to make sure that even if it landed off-screen, it was able to affect both of the characters, maintaining that identity of the item itself. So, glad that I caught that here. You also change the properties of the Guard Crush as well whenever you hit this item. It's pretty moderate when you just toss it. However, as you can see, it lasts substantially longer when you're able to actually hit the item, making sure that you're rewarded for your ability to time this and make contact with the opponent. All of the items that were not able to be interacted with or obtained, as the patch notes say, until they touch the ground, now have a property where they can be obtained while they are airborne if Faust hits them with dust or with hole-in-one. As you can see, I'm not able to pick up the Afro while it's airborne, but after I hit it, you can now interact with it while it's airborne from these moves. This is useful for some of the aggressive items that Faust wants to use, like Afro if he wants to put it on the opponent. It's a little less useful when it comes to the other items like Donut or the first part of Banana, because while you might be hoping that if you use Banana while it's the peel, that you could just hit the opponent with it for a hard knockdown. Nah, it goes right through them. It can only be interacted with there. This only applies to when Banana is a full banana. So then the opponent can actually eat it and gain the benefit from it, and then the peel is in play for the players to think about. So this also applies with Trumpet, and I mentioned Afro already, Banana, Donut. It's those 4 items. It's also worth mentioning that from my own particular testing when it comes to the damage values as well as other behaviors, that there's not really a difference between striking an item with your dust or with hole-in-one. So I'd argue that unless you're trying to flex your Faust mastery or you have specific timings and setup that reliably have your dust hit as opposed to hole-in-one for particular angles, that you're probably going to be using hole-in-one for its massive hitbox. That means you're going to have an easier time interacting with these items. Of course, there's a lot of skill expression here to explore with Faust that I'm not going to go into for this video, so keep an eye out on any sort of Faust tech master that you might know to see what sort of timing tools they have to get particular angles with this new ability to launch items at the opponent. I think that Faust has some of the most fun changes within the patch themselves. Overall, they don't really do much to adjust his overall strength within the tier list, but they certainly make him a different kind of character to play, where all of a sudden the Faust player has an additional layer of choices to make when it comes to how they want to play around their items. They've been building more on this identity for Faust for quite some time, and I think that there's plenty of new things to sort of go around and play with. And I think it also adds another level of skill expression overall for the character in terms of, hey, can you control what angles you want to hit your items from? And how do you want to zone with these items? What items are you able to get into play? It does take a little bit of the consistent RNG factor out of it, like, for example, removing the need to scramble for Trumpet, because if you swallow Trumpet now, you just spit it out near you and pretty much guarantee that it's near you every single time. But maybe there's mind games to play where the opponent thinks you're going to go there, and then they run at you, and you spit it behind them just to then combo into it yourself. I think there's a lot of potential to be explored with Faust that unfortunately the scope of a video like this, which is just trying to do a basic rundown of all the new changes that he received in this patch, aren't able to fully explore. Again, I don't think he's significantly better or worse than he was before, but I think that he certainly just has a new dynamic element to him that really plays into the character's identity around playing with random items.